Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So I haven't did a live video in a day or so. I wanted to catch up on some of the content. I had a list of videos that I wanted to do. And sometimes live videos take a little bit longer than I want to do to make those videos. And so what I think I'm going to probably start doing is interacting with my audience in some videos, and in other videos just doing them short and sweet and to the point. I think it reaches a larger audience in that way. For the people who are there for the live videos, I get to interact with my audience, and for the other videos, I get to get through the content because I had a ton of videos that I didn't get back to. It's like a backlog. So that being said, how is everyone doing at the 6:27 a.m. on Sunday? I couldn't sleep. I've been up doing videos for the past 2 hours. Like most real men, when I can't sleep, I get up and do the news. So let me check my mic, make sure my mic is okay. There are two stories that I think I'm going to do live, and I'm going to hop across the pond for this particular story. Guys, if you enjoy my content, please subscribe and please hit the bell, because I do live videos all the time. Like I said, it's 6:28 in the morning. So on a Sunday, I do videos all the time. I can be up. If I'm awake, I just say, screw it, I'm going to do the news. I'm going to do the news. This one is a shameful display at something considered to be the news, even though I would have a hard time calling it as news. I call it propaganda because that's essentially what it is. They're red baiting. This is gross, and you can even call it xenophobic to some degree, but they're doing this for political ends. This is the Sunday Times. This was what they woke up to. Exposed! Russians tried to swing election for Corbyn. Russians tried to swing the election for Corbyn. Now, if you're living in America, you probably say, hey, that sounds familiar. Those pesky Russians were all over the place. If there was an environmentalist that was pissed off, there was a Russian there trying to make them more pissed off. If there was a Bernie supporter that was pissed off that Hillary Clinton cheated them, there was a Russian there making them more pissed off. Russians have been blamed from everything from environmentalists to Black Lives Matter to Bernie Sanders supporters being pissed off that the Hillary Clinton campaign cheated them. Russians blamed for it all. Even Republicans got in on the blaming bandwagon. And now it's jumped across the pond. I've always said, we're your darker brother. There are things, there are currents that run in our politics that are very similar, even though we may have different organizations, the way we organize ourselves. And here we are, red baiting. Jeremy Corbyn the Russians tried to swing the election for Corbyn. I got to be honest, I care less about what's in that election and more so how this looks. Most people just read the title. They let it just sink in for a moment. Think about that. If you look at the title, Russians tried to swing the election for Corbyn, what does that tell you? What does it even look like? Look how they painted him in red. This is on the heels of one of the other organizations, news organizations, putting a hat on his head to make him look like he was a commie, and had that running in the background the entire time he was doing the video. This is not arbitrary. This is a propaganda attempt by this kind of corporate forces in Britain that own these media organizations to go after Corbyn. The guy, I think it was for the BBC, kind of made this point saying behind the scenes, yeah, we can't necessarily say anything too overt, but we can do this through media. And that's exactly what they're doing, through media. Red menacing, red baiting. Back during the Cold War, and I'm going to relate this to the United States for a moment, because that's where I live, and that's where it makes sense to me, even though, like I said, the similar tide is going in Britain. The United States is two major parties. But there were other parties in the United States. FDR, what many people don't forget, even though he's held as a hero on the left, his main thing said, I saved capitalism. That is my greatest achievement. Now, immediately after saving capitalism, not even immediately after, there was a coup to try to take FDR out that office. This kind of business coup, this wealthy plutocratic coup that didn't like the stuff that he was doing in that office. That coup was stopped. But immediately after FDR died, they started clawing back the gains that FDR made. Part of the things that created also immediately after the Cold War, Uncle Joe, meaning Stalin, went from being Uncle Joe to just Stalin again. He was a brutal dictator, autocrat, murderer, and the Soviet Union was this horrible system that was anti-freedom and anti-democratic in their system and all this other stuff. Now, a lot of this was propaganda on both sides, and many bad things took place from the standpoint of putting in puppet dictatorships, or the United States putting in also dictatorships in order to try to stem the tide of leftist forces. Some of these forces weren't even leftist to the standpoint of communists, but the United States didn't particularly care. That engaged us in one war or one proxy war after the next. Vietnam being one of the major points in that, this kind of domino theory that if even one podunk country fall, then a whole row of them are going to fall, and communism is going to take over the world, and we're going to be speaking Russian, or something to that effect. None of those proclamations came to pass. All of that was lunacy, but that was the thinking that took place in the past. The other side effect of this was stemming the tide on the left, meaning there was a rage of debate that you can go for, but this McCarthyite period in the United States had this effect of stemming left. You're looking a little red there, buddy. You're looking a little, are you a commie? Are you a commie? Are you pushing for the Soviet Union? Are you against freedom? Are you a commie? If you move too far to the left, you were painted with this kind of brush that you were some kind of commie. That stemmed the tide of thinking in the United States. That created almost like a barrier. This thing, this door that you couldn't necessarily walk through because it was barbed wired with this kind of propaganda that you have two major parties, and going in this way of calling yourself a socialist. He said socialist. They were terrified by the word. It instilled that into the public consciousness of the United States for a generation. Only now we get into the point where people have started whispering socialist. And then people asked about it, and you have half of the American public say, capitalism is not doing too great for us. We may be okay with socialism. Out comes red menacing again. You have this radical center, and they call themselves a center, but ultimately they're this just kind of corporatist section. I mean, ultimately they function in two parties, but I don't necessarily think they care all that much from the standpoint of who wins. Both parties, for the most part, would keep their thing going. Both parties are bought by the same people. When the Republican Party had members saying, if we don't pass these tax cuts, lose our phone numbers. And then you had the Democratic people, donors, coming out saying, I told them to shut up about class. And if they said anything else about class, I will shut their money off. Donors coming out in public saying this stuff. They're bought by the same people. Now, the Republicans have always had this thing where they were bought. Democrats realized at some point that, hey, this McCarthyite shit worked really well. There are only two parties, and we really don't only need to be least worse. Meaning we can also be bought by the same people. And the forces on the left, the lefties, progressives, socialists, they wouldn't have anywhere else to go, so they would stick with us. They'll hitch their star to our burning wagon, and we'll essentially stay in the middle with status quo, giving little incremental stuff on the sides and telling them that this is the best that we can do, and you need to be extraordinarily happy with the tiny bit that you get. So yeah, you get Obamacare, and your rates are still going through the roof, and you still have like 20 million people who don't have health care. But hey, that's incrementalism. That's the best that you can get. That's the parties. The Republican Party is more rapacious, but the Democratic Party in this country uses this as this kind of plot point of sticking around, where we can be just least worse, still take the money from business interests because lefties don't have anywhere to go. And our goal at this point is modulating how least worse we can be. What's the least amount people are willing to vote for to put us back in that office. In this country, the red menace stuff has become absurd. Like I said, they've used that justification for any and everything to try to hit at all these different elements. But one of the key components of this is continually attacking the left. This idea that it wasn't that the country wanted your ideas. It was more so that the Ruskies were pushing these things. Because at this point, Russia has become this kind of odd pejorative, where you're essentially denigrating a particular culture for political effect. It's odd that calling somebody a Russian, that Russians did something is enough to smear somebody. That is problematic, to say the least. Whatever that says about the cultures in Britain and America, that this has become this kind of pejorative where you can smear somebody with this. Smearing somebody just because they're, Russians did something on their behalf. This is fucking weird. But that is where we are in our politics. This red menace stuff was used to great effect in order to stem the tide of the left in the United States. It seems like they're stepping this out also in Britain now. Now, the problem with this is, like I said, you're denigrating a particular race and culture and everything else. Or let's say a particular culture for political effect. They know goddamn well Russians had no effect in that election with Corbyn. They know goddamn well Russians had no effect with the election in the United States. Nobody in their right mind would say such a thing. But they don't need to say such a thing. It's only enough to say the Ruskies tried to help this guy elected. This was the Russian candidate. This was the guy that Russians were backing. Do you really want to support the person who Russians were backing? Again, the fact that no effect doesn't matter. Look, this is not going to work. I get annoyed by this because this is fucking nasty, but it's not going to work. Back in the 50s and the 60s, for the most part, the McCarthy era, there was one source of news, meaning the stream of information that people got often came just from one source. Well, that's not the case anymore. You have this diversified bit of information that people are not stuck and fixed to the television screen. You have an older demographic, I think in the 60s or so, like 65 or something like that watches mainstream television. But the rest are online. Meaning you may get the faction that's on their deathbed, but the majority of with me, they're not going to buy into this shit. They see this for what it is. A shameless display by the plutocratic class in order to push back against these populist forces. And you won't win. This won't work. This won't work. There are too many diversified sources of information. And the left, or the centristic left, the Blairites, the Clintonites, have fucked up so royally that in the United States you've allowed the maniac to take control of the helm because of how bad and failed the previous administrations have been from the Democratic ticket, and then putting Hillary Clinton up was just the last straw, trying to force the woman down our throats. In your country, Cameron and Blair, one is a war criminal that literally took the country into a war, decimated your country. And the second one is fucking incompetent. All the police stabbings and everything else that you had in Britain, you had hospital ambulances waiting in lines because they didn't put the resources into the organizations that needed to in your country. Meaning they didn't support the NHS in the degree that it needed to be supported. They've led your country to ruin. They're trying to make you little America. Corbyn is the guy who's trying to change it. And he's trying to claw back some of the gains that these guys have given over to private interests. We don't have that in the United States. The closest thing we probably have is something like a Tulsi Gabbard or Sanders. Nothing to the degree of Corbyn. And clearly, they are terrified of him. So, good on Corbyn. No, this will not work. This will not work. But nevertheless, it's still fucking aggravating that they're trying to do this. This is red baiting. This is smearing. This is McCarthy, neo-McCarthyism in the UK. In the UK. Let's see, is anybody here? I don't know if anybody will be here this early in the morning. Oh, Jamal, you mean Jill Stein, also known as Kremlin something. Sir Bikes a lot. The deep state will be like, oh shit, the socialist is winning. Quick, use the red smear. Kind of, yeah. I mean, like, I don't necessarily know if it's that defined, but it does seem like there's an organized method of trying to attack Jeremy Corbyn in the UK. And one of the gentlemen said that the media outlets said that they will and they can attack him at the very least through media and print and the way things look. So again, the BBC, I think it was the BBC, with the BBC or Sky News, having this big banner background with Jeremy Corbyn as a Ruski, even changing his hat. Owen Jones kind of made mention of this, changing his hat to make it look more Russian. Like, this is apparently is the attack pattern that these guys are using. This is not even the political parties attacking him. Understand what I mean? This is literally the organizations of labor, of newspapers and media outlets attacking Jeremy Corbyn. It's fucking amazing. Like, again, objectivity is out the window. They're terrified of the guy. Not because of the guy is a failure. They're terrified because he may be a success. They're terrified of him for the same reason Democrats are terrified of having Bernie Sanders in. If Bernie Sanders gets in that office and he changes things, he obliterates their model. This idea of what was impossible all of a sudden became those guys were fucking liars. This stuff is possible. They just weren't doing it. And the business model that is the Democratic Party going forward, being this corporatist thing, gets demolished. At the very least until something else comes along and changes it to some kind of corporate hack again. I'm just making a point that the Blairites that were in the UK, they love this. Theresa May's government will use this. But this is not political actors doing this. These are plutocratic forces in this country that own these media outlets that have given the order to attack Corbyn in this red neo-McCarthyistic way that denigrates Russians for political effect. It's gross and nasty. It's gross and nasty. So, all right. I'm not going to keep this one too long because I want this one to be seen and I don't want people having like a 40-minute video. But I know it's early, guys, but thank you still for showing up. And Sir Bike Silla today, thank you very much. I have another one coming up after this that's going to be about 10-15 minutes, however long it takes to set up. But I'll see you guys again shortly. Thanks, guys. That is the wrong button.